Hello, everybody. Welcome to IASP's Advocacy 101, Increasing IASP's Legislative Footprint. Making a goal here at IASP to become more involved with our advocacy on a statewide basis. When we talk about advocacy through IASP, basically have three components to that: the Indiana Department of Education, the Indiana State Board of Education, and the Indiana General Assembly, our state legislative branch. And what we're going to talk about in regard to this webinar is advocacy with the Indiana General Assembly. So just to give you some background about our General Assembly, we do have what is known as a bicameral legislature, meaning two houses. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate, very similar to our National Congress. Our General Assembly is made up of 100 representatives who serve 2-year terms, and we have 50 senators which serve 4-year terms. We have what is known as a part-time legislature, meaning they do not meet year-round. In even-numbered years, the General Assembly meets for 30 days. This is known as the short session, and they must adjourn by statute by March the 15th. In odd-numbered years, they meet for 61 days. It's known as the long session, and they must adjourn by April 30th. This is also the year that the budget is discussed and passed. So we have a biennial budget. So when it's passed in those odd numbers of years, as it was last year in 2019, I mean, currently in the 2019 year, it is a 2-year budget. So this year, 2020, when it starts in January, they will not be discussing the budget or any appropriations. So just to kind of give you an idea of how a bill becomes a law in Indiana, without boring you too much to death, and if you've had some basic understanding of government and how things work, you probably have a pretty good idea. But just to kind of review some things again, bills are introduced in an original house, so that can either be the House or the Senate, and they're labeled either HB or SB, depending upon which house, and a number after it. So in the House, they start with in the thousands. So in a long session, the biennial budget is always the first bill that is put together and proposed. So it is always labeled HB 1001, 1001. Then they start numbering bills from there. 1002, 1003, so on. Senate bills start with single digits. Senate Bill 1, 2, 3, etc. That's how they're numbered. So a bill goes through its original reading, its first reading in the original House, and then it is assigned to a committee, depending upon the topic of the bill. From there, the committee chairman of each committee has a great deal of power. They decide which bills are actually going to be heard in their committee. If a bill does not receive a hearing in its committee, it is automatically dead. It doesn't go any further. But if it does receive a reading or a hearing in the committee, then that's a public committee hearing. Testimony is taken, so people can sign up to testify in favor of or opposed to the bill. And the committee makes a decision on whether or not to pass it out. Usually if it gets into a committee and it's heard, the bill gets passed out of committee. Not necessarily with a unanimous vote, but usually the bill gets passed out. Sometimes it does not, but if it receives a hearing, there's a good chance it's going to get passed out. From there, it goes back to the original House floor for a second reading, and then it has to go through a third reading, and then there's a final vote taken in simple majority rules. And again, in the House of Representatives, there are 100 reps. Senate, there are 50. So if it gets a majority vote, it is passed out of that house. Then it goes to the other house, and it goes through the same process. A first reading, assigned to committee. Again, the committee chairman has an opportunity to hear the bill within committee or not. If it passes out of committee, goes through the second and the third reading, and then it's passed out of the second house. Now, there's a key here. If it has any changes whatsoever, the author, the original author from the original house, either has to confirm those changes and agree with those changes, or dissent. And if they do not agree with the changes, if they dissent, then it has to go to a conference committee. And the conference committee always happens the last 2 or 3 weeks of the session. Again, there are conference committees that deal with specific topics. There are conferees that are appointed, and all conferees must sign off and approve the changes, the final version of that bill. And then again, the original author has to either agree with those changes or not. If the changes are agreed with, then it passes out of the second house and it goes to the governor. The governor can sign it or veto it. Has to do that within 7 days. If he doesn't act on it in 7 days, it automatically becomes law. And so if the bill is passed, the title of it goes from HB or SB to HEA, which stands for House Enrolled Act, or Senate Enroll Act. Usually laws go into effect July 1st, but certain laws can go into effect immediately if so designated. So some tools that you can use as you become more active in our legislative agenda. You always want to make sure that you have the Indiana General Assembly website, and it's listed there for you, iga.in.gov, on maybe one of your quick tabs there, so you can access that easily. You can view webcasts of the committee hearings or of the actual sessions. You can view calendars and schedules for the houses there. Under the committees tab, if you click on standing committees, then you will see that you can find the House Education or the Senate Education and Career Development tabs, which will take you to those respective committees. And those are the committees that we deal with most often. Under the Legislative tab, you can find a list of the bills that have been proposed. And then, under the Search tab, you can pull up Indiana Code. You can see bills, and you can view and find legislators there also. So that's the General Assembly website. Want to make sure you are also listening to our weekly podcasts. Once the session begins in January, I will be bringing you weekly podcasts, giving you updates and highlights, perhaps a call to action, legislation that we want to deal with immediately and try to get membership involved. Also on our Schoolhouse News, which comes out on Mondays, we will have a section on there once the General Assembly gets going, bills that we are tracking. And then coming soon, we're also looking at purchasing an action alert system, which will send you notifications on your phone if you choose. We're not going to deluge you if you are not interested, but if you want to sign up for those notifications, you'll get those when we send those out. So how can I become more involved if I'm an IASP member and I want to get more involved in this situation? Number one, we would ask that you familiarize yourself with the IASP 2020 legislative platform and priorities. We've been working on that document, and it will not be finalized until our November board meeting, which coincides with our fall conference. But as soon as our board of directors adopts that legislative platform, we'll be sending it out. We'll make it accessible on the website. But that will give you an idea of where we stand on issues and what priorities we have. Also, become aware of who your representative and senator is from your district. And I would suggest that if you do not live where you work in your school, make sure you find out who your representatives are where you live and in the school that you serve. I think that would be good information for you. There's a link there where you can find your legislator, typing in addresses, zip codes, etc. Make sure you keep up with our weekly Schoolhouse News and the legislative podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at IN Principles. That's the IASP Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is at TMAC602. I'll be pushing out legislative updates via that method. Make sure you participate in any call to action that IASP might publish. We might ask you to contact your legislator via email or phone call. And we want to make sure, I put on there on the screen to avoid copy paste emails. We will not usually do that in terms of telling you exactly what to say. Believe it or not, legislators can notice if they're getting a lot of multiple emails that say the same thing, and that actually kind of turns them off. They like to hear from you in an authentic sense, what your concerns are. Other things you can do to become more involved, we do have a legislative platform committee where we have one member from each level, from each district. So we have up to 36 people on that committee. That committee has met here in early October and put together our legislative platform that I mentioned for 2020. Those positions change over from year to year. If you're interested in maybe doing that, contact your district president and let them know that you're interested in serving on that committee. And the last thing I listed there is, if you really want to get involved with this, let me know. And if you are willing to come down and provide some testimony at committee meetings. I meet with legislators one-on-one all the time, and they tell me time and time again they like hearing from the field. And I know that can be an intimidating thing, but they want to hear from you. So please, if you feel interested, and I'd be glad to coach you up in regards to testimony, if you are interested in doing that. This is a screenshot. You can tell I very poorly blacked some things out on it, but to try to protect names and such. But this was a tweet a little over a year ago, I'd say, that I saw. And as you can read that, it says, tonight my state senator shared in a forum that he knows an issue is hot if 10 people email or call his office. He sent out a mailer asking for feedback on 6 questions and heard from less than 2%. Finish up by asking, how can we expect them to represent us if they don't know what we think? I have heard this confirmed from other legislators. They pay attention with 3 or 4 or 5 emails on a specific topic. We have 3,000 members across the state, IASP. I think we can get 10 or more people to be interested in certain topics, which to them designates it as a hot topic. So we just need your participation. We need you to act if possible. So you say, how can I advocate successfully? Well, I put some tips down here. So as we look at some of these things, number one is you need to be registered to vote. I'm sure that administrators in the state are active in their communities. Hopefully you are registered. Hopefully you take the time to vote. Hopefully you take time to find out about candidates and what their thoughts are, their issues are, especially about education. Make sure you educate yourself on education-related legislation. Again, follow us, our Schoolhouse News, listen to our podcasts. If you don't get the Chalk Beat daily email in regard to education topics, sign up for that. You can go to www.chalkbeat and sign up for their daily notification, and it will contain articles from around the state, different journals, newspapers, in regard to education topics. Great way to stay up with that. Obviously, your local newspaper, Indianapolis Star here in Central Indiana, and the various areas of the state have those local papers. Read up on education-related issues. Follow your legislators on Twitter and Facebook or Instagram or whatever else they might be on. They post a lot of things on there. It's a good way for them anymore to get their name out there, especially with the younger generation, and try to encourage people to vote for them. So you'd be surprised what you can learn about individual legislators on social media. You can watch committee hearings on webcast. If you go to that IGA website, you can click on hearings and watch the live broadcasts. They broadcast them all on the internet. Last session last year in 2019, the House Education Committee met on Wednesday mornings at 8:30 a.m. They met on some Monday mornings, and those meetings are again posted on the IGA website. The Senate Ed Committee met on Wednesday afternoons at 1:30 p.m. Pull it up while you're working at your desk, and if you have to walk away, that kind of thing, but you can get a good idea of the things that they're talking about. Invite legislators to visit your school. Education, they often say is 52% of our budget. And so education issues are important to them. When they can get photo opportunities in a school, they will take you up on that offer. Invite them to your concerts or your science fair or STEM activities, open house events, athletic events, principal for the day. Invite them to be principal for the day in your building. Invite them to your school. Now, oftentimes, once they get in session in January, that's not always the best time for them because they are busy downtown from January till March this year in the short session. But they are legislators year-round. You can invite them to activities in the first semesters and or in the spring, and you'll be surprised that they might take you up on that. If you're having a local principal meeting, within your county maybe, or your athletic conference, your IASP district meetings, invite some of those legislators to attend. Give them 5-10 minutes to talk. See if they'll do some Q&A. Get to know them. Attend your legislators' town hall meetings if they have them, or other public meetings. Get to know them. Introduce yourself. Let them know who you are. Let them know you're an administrator at an elementary school, middle school, high school. Schedule a meeting with your legislator to talk about issues that are important to your school or your area. Offer to be an education resource for your legislators if they have any questions, or sometimes they just like a group of people to bounce ideas off of. Never underestimate speaking with a legislative assistant. Do not feel put off if you're talking with an LA, because the legislative assistants are the ones who give those legislators their information. If you can develop a good relationship with an LA, that oftentimes is much more powerful than speaking directly with the representative or the senator. Number 12 there, I put 12 and 13 are important. Be patient. The legislative process can be a long, drawn-out process. At the beginning of every session in January, there's lots of bills that are introduced, and some of them are just bizarre. Some of them make our skin crawl. But we have to be careful not to overreact, because it is a process. Through the committee hearings, through testimony, through meeting one-on-one with legislators, we are very often able to get changes made in the legislation. And sometimes legislation still gets passed that is bad, but it's better than it was when it started. Less restrictive, maybe a little more sensible, but it is a long process. So I encourage people to always be patient with it. And then the last thing is whenever you are speaking, whether that is publicly, with the media, one-on-one with the legislator, maintain a positive tone. Offer solutions. Legislators get turned off immediately when people they're talking to are aggressive, standoffish, shouting, out of control. You will not be heard. If you want to complain, you can complain, but you won't be heard. And so it's very important. We always try to take the route of offering solutions, always saying please and thank you, and being nice, practicing being nice. It's about building relationships. You can't have influence, and leadership is influence. You cannot have influence if you don't have a relationship. So always work on building those relationships in a positive way. So as we get close to the end here, just want to maybe talk about a few things that may come up in the 2020 legislative session. Again, I spent a lot of time this summer meeting individually with representatives and senators. I spent time going to the interim education committee meetings that they held. And, this is kind of looking in the crystal ball. We don't have any idea what will be proposed. We'll be surprised by something, I can guarantee you that. But I think some things that we can count on being discussed. Number one, teacher pay. And I know for principals that you don't really have a lot of impact with that. But I think the conversation around this topic is going to get more intense. Keep in mind, it is not a budget year. So there's not really much that can be done in terms of funding for teacher pay raises, but I think it's going to be a hot topic. And I think the legislature is going to put pressure on school districts to ante up, to increase teacher pay, and to have plenty of ideas for school districts, whether that's through legislation or just through resolution. But I think they're going to have something to say to school districts in regards to how they should be paying teachers. Secondly, the accountability model. We know that the high school accountability panel has been meeting. There will be a recommendation. They're supposed to have recommendations by early November here. And that will then go into the court of the legislature to see what they might mandate through legislation, what they might recommend. I would not be surprised if the topic of K-8 accountability also comes up. I've heard a lot of legislators talk about if they're looking at high school, maybe we should look at K-8. And I do think there is a little bit of a flavor to go away from only the iLearn test, which I think a lot of you will applaud that, but looking at some other measures, whether that is attendance or who knows what. But I do think there is some flavor to look at that. They will, I think, look again at required trainings for teachers and staff, the bloodborne pathogen trainings, the suicide prevention trainings, etc. It's about 18 of them now that are mandated by state legislation. I think, I do know that the summer committee required the DOE to conduct a survey. They've done that. They're putting together the data. I think there might end up being some legislation that will probably require the DOE to make some recommendations on how to streamline those trainings. So we'll make sure we keep up with that, offer good input when necessary. Then I think the last thing is getting a lot of play is the career counseling piece. And, I'm not necessarily talking about counseling in regard to what your guidance counselors are doing on a daily basis, but I think with the push with CTE and assisting students in choosing good careers, those high wage, high demand jobs they keep talking about, I think there'll be a lot of emphasis put on career counseling. Again, non-budget year. We'll see how that turns out. So that's all. Hopefully that wasn't too boring, but I would welcome any questions, any thoughts, any concerns. There's my information, my contact info there. Feel free to reach out. I'll be in touch with you all. Again, we have our conferences coming up, the Assistant Principals Conference, Fall Professionals Conference in November. I'm sure we'll be providing some more information in regard to advocacy and legislation at that point, and then hopefully hit the ground running in January when the General Assembly meets and begins their session, their short session for 2020. So thank you for listening to this. Again, I welcome any questions or feedback. Let me know. We are looking for people who are interested in serving our membership across the state to increase our legislative footprint. So thank you for listening, and please have a great day.